Here is an overview of QuickGraph version 4.0. As always, students can come in and type the titles and units for their independent and dependent variables. They then type in all the data that they collected in lab. Here's an example where students measured distances on the floor and had a toy car move those different distances. They timed how long it took the car to move each of those distances. They typed in all their data, and then they realized they mixed up their independent and dependent variable. They can simply hit the switch button to move the independent to where the dependent was, and vice versa. Here's another group of students who collected some data on the force on a car versus its acceleration. The students got a nice graph. They get their equation. And when they're all done, they realize they accidentally collected the data using the pound setting on their scale instead of the Newton setting on their scale. So all these values are not Newtons, they're actually pounds. In this version, they can quickly fix this by modifying the X data. They would go in here and they'd realize to change from pounds to Newtons, they must multiply each of their numbers by 4.45. So they make the constant 4.45 and they simply click on the multiply. This will now turn all of those pound readings into Newtons and students will get a correct graph. Students have the option to override the equation that the computer gets for them. They would hit override equation. They would realize that this should be a proportional graph that goes through the origin, so they set this at 0, 0. And they could then just manually try different values to get what looks like the best fit graph. Okay, so they can use the one that the computer gave them, or they could override it and do it manually. Here's another group of students who collected the mass of a car and the acceleration of the car, and when they're all done graphing, they realized that they collected it in grams when it was supposed to be in kilograms. Down the bottom for each column, there's the ability to move the decimal point. So they move it over 3 spots to turn the grams into kilograms. They then see they have an inverse relationship. They go to curve fit, they pick inverse, and they get their equation. Students also have the option, if they prefer, instead of doing an inverse fit, to modify their data and just inverse all of their masses, and then doing a linear fit to the data. So they can linearize their data real easily using the modify option on this program. If they decide they want to go back to the original data, they just hit restore. Then they'd go back to the original curve fit, which was inverse. Students hopefully can switch their axes real quickly. So if they want to modify what is being displayed in terms of the maximum and minimums, they can go into set axes. They might realize they don't need to go all the way up to 10, so they might want to just go to 6. They might want to go a little farther than 1, so maybe 1.5. Then they would hit manual and it would redo their axes based on what they want to be the maximum and minimums for their X's and their Y's. Anytime they want, they could switch it back to the computer version and it will manually scale the axes for them. Okay, here's another group of students who collected the radius of a circular object versus its area. And when they were all done, they realized that they got really bad data. Thinking about what they did, they realized that when they measured the radius, they measured starting at the 10 centimeter mark of the meter stick rather than at the 0, which was a little worn out. They forgot to subtract 10 from all of their values. So they can go into modify data. They can make their C value 10, and they could subtract that from all of their numbers. And now they get a nice squared relationship. If the students want to share this with one of their lab partners, or they want to save it for later, they can now use this save graph option. They click on this. This link will actually contain a URL that has all the information to regenerate this graph. So instead of actually clicking on this link, the students can right-click and hit copy link and then send that to their partner. If they do click on this link, up in the URL will give them a long string with all the information to regenerate this graph. They could bookmark that page, or they could copy and paste that into a document and save that URL for later. So these are some of the new changes to QuickGraph version 4.0. I hope it's helpful.